Recently, I've been selling my soul on eBay. Metaphorically, of course. In reality, I don't actually have a soul. In particular, I've been selling my collection of ancient Roman coins that I've had for about 30 years. Interesting things, but I no longer want to possess objects like this. But sorting them for sale reminded me of why I found them so fascinating in the first place. Like any collectible, you can just obsessively focus on the object itself. Collect all this, collect all that. But what always drew me to them was not the collectible aspect of it, but the fact that in a limited sense they are a window into the past. When I think about history, I think about the people, about their names, their experiences, their mothers and fathers, brothers, sisters, sons and daughters. I'd like to know what their lives were like and what their daily experiences were. Unfortunately, a coin doesn't tell you much of that, but it can tell you who ruled at that time. It often tells you about their sons and wives, sisters and brothers. Coins often depict them. Sometimes it tells you about which gods they worshipped. It usually tells you their titles, their conquests, where the coin was minted. But most of all, many coins of this era tell you something far more interesting, at least to me. They tell you what that person actually looked like, or at least give you a pretty good idea most of the time. But how do we know? Testing an historical claim is not easy. The greater number of sources you have, the better. But just having several sources isn't always a guarantee. What if all those sources are derived from another older source, and that source got it wrong? So independence of sources is also important. In the case of a coin, it helps if we have other images of the person in question, statues, busts, engravings, etc., preferably contemporary with the person in question. Tiberius Caesar succeeded Augustus Caesar and ruled as emperor from 1437 CE. Bit of a grump by all accounts, the kind of guy who would sit alone in a dark corner of the pub with his terrier, nursing a pint of bitter, averse to company, not really a party guy. We have a pretty good idea of what Tiberius Caesar looked like. There are multiple sources, contemporary, independent, busts, statues, cameos, etc., and sometimes unusual objects, such as this sword scabbard. They must number in the many thousands. And the coins, thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of coins of Tiberius, still in circulation amongst collectors, dealers, and in museums today. In the New Testament, there's a story of how Jesus was asked if tribute should be paid to Caesar. Hence the King James version of this story and the English translation of Render unto Caesar. Tradition has it that the coin in question is a denarius of Tiberius, a silver penny, a tribute penny. Coins of this type often have inflated values as a consequence. Tiberius on the obverse, with Livia, his wife, seated on the reverse. Of course, this isn't all tradition. It's probable that the events in question never really happened. Other traditions hold that the coin in question was a tetradrachm, bearing Tiberius' image. Regardless, we know with a high degree of certainty that Tiberius Caesar was a real human being. We know what he looked like, what he did, what contemporaries said of him. We even have insights into his personality. But what about Jesus holding the penny? There are no contemporary coins depicting an image of or referring to Jesus. There are no contemporary statues, busts, or inscriptions of Jesus. No contemporaries refer to him at all. It's almost as though he didn't exist. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not a mythicist. The idea that the religion was founded around a real human being is entirely plausible, entirely natural. This is not a problem for me as a non-Christian. But for Christians it surely is. They mostly don't think of Christ as merely an obscure historical figure. They think of him as God on earth. He brings the dead back to life, he walks on water. He turns water into wine, he cures leprosy with a touch, and feeds 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Ultimately he dies but rises again. And yet no one mentions this at the time. No one. Seems like a pretty big omission to me.